Okay, I think we're going to get started. Welcome to everyone who's joined on the line. Thank you, everyone, for helping to start 501c. This is our third episode, and you will see some exciting announcements to build out the community online and possibly in the real world over the next few months. For those of you attending the Tableau conference in October, look for a special announcement for a live session from the floor of the conference. I'm Pam Serpoli, and will be your moderator today. The idea behind 501c is simple, yet it has a huge goal to improve the impact of nonprofits by using data in two simple ways: to make decisions and take action. Showing data to make it look pretty or see a few KPIs doesn't move the needle. And because nonprofits are generally open to sharing their data, the community as a whole can learn much faster. We have a lot of groundwork to cover, so let's get started. In addition to Lee Feinberg, the leader of 501c, we have Neil Mirkachnik as co-presenter from the United Nations World Food Program. Neil, thank you for being here. Neil has been conducting nutrition situation analysis for the World Food Program Nutrition Division's that's a mouthful there, fill the nutrient gap team for over 2 years. He has led consultations with government policymakers and technical implementers to improve access to nutritious diets in Guatemala, Ecuador, Mozambique, Rwanda, Cambodia, and the Philippines. Neil holds a master's in public administration for development practice from Columbia's University School of International and Public Affairs. Neil is passionate about digging through data sets, finding interesting things, and building his capacity to share these findings with a wide array of audiences. A little about Lee Feinberg. Lee has worked with Tableau since 2009 and started DecisionViz in 2012. Today, he's going to take you through his Design to Act framework, which is quite different from how you might be used to working with analytics. Lee treats making decisions and taking action as the stars of the story, and data has a supporting role. A few housekeeping items. You'll be on mute until Q&A, so feel free to put questions into chat. You will also receive a link to a recording of the session in about a week. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is hand over the session to Lee Feinberg. Lee?
Yep. Thanks, Pam and Neil, and hi to everyone joining us today and those who might be watching us on the replay. So 501c is born out of the intersection of three things that are personally important to me. One is working with nonprofits. Two is my work with the Tableau Foundation, which I encourage you all to learn more about if you haven't heard about it. And three is having been leading over 80 Tableau user groups since 2010. So I've brought all those three things together to create this event. And today, Neil and I are going to spend about the first 15 minutes just having a conversation about his work. And what I want you to really know about this is he has no idea what I'm going to ask him. This is not rehearsed, and I haven't studied their data. I haven't studied what he's done. He's given me a workbook. And so before we go and figure out how we're going to improve those dashboards, I really have to get an understanding of why they're even needed. And then we'll go into the data and Tableau and finish the rest of the session. And again, at the end, we'll have some Q&A. So Neil, are you ready to jump in?
Let's do it, Lee.
All right, great. So just to start out, can you give everybody just a little bit of background on how you've been using data so far and why you've been doing and what you've been doing with Tableau?
Sure. Yeah. So as Pam said in the introduction, I'm working for the World Food Program on a project called Fill the Nutrient Gap. And in the 6 countries she's listed, as well as a few others that are upcoming, we're providing technical assistance to governments on usually the national nutrition policy. And one interesting thing that we're looking at is how much does it cost for different populations to purchase a diet that meets their nutrient needs. And then by doing that analysis, we can start to figure out who are the people within a country who have a hard time meeting their nutrient needs, and then what are some of the interventions that we can do to break down those barriers and try to increase the number of people in a country who can access a nutritious diet.
Wow, that sounds pretty amazing to be able to work on.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And I also would imagine it's pretty rewarding.
Yeah, when it goes well. And fortunately for me, in all the countries I've been working on, we've had a great rapport, a great buy-in from the governments we're working with, and we've been able to bring some new information that can better inform the policymakers in a given country.
So that's actually a perfect lead-in. So you're doing your work. Who's really your customer? Who's your audience?
Sure, it will vary within a different country depending on who the main actors are for nutrition. So in some countries, there can be a really strong NGO community or the UN agencies or the World Bank, USAID, DFID, where they're really strong actors. But in a lot of the countries we're working on, some of the middle income countries, the governments are very strong and they have complete ownership of delivering on nutrition. So I guess with the example that we'll look at today, we can say the customer is the government of Ecuador that is trying to put into place their plan, a plan called Misión Ternura, that's looking at nutrition of children.
So do you do a completely different type of analysis for each country, or do you tend to start with the same information?
We get a lot of the same information in each of the different countries, and a big part of our analysis, something that differentiates us from some of the other organizations, is that we use software called Cost of the Diet, which was developed by Save the Children, which can look at 16 different nutrients for any given person. We can say for a pregnant woman, for a child 2 years old, for an adolescent girl, and using food prices of foods available in whichever given region, we can get a sense of how much would it cost each day for this person to meet their nutrient needs. And then we can triangulate that with economic data and say, this is how much people are spending on food, this is how much it costs for them to meet their nutrient needs, and this is our estimate of the percentage of the population that can purchase a diet that meets their nutrient needs with foods available on the local market.
So you have a couple of different data sources that you have to bring together.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And so how is it that you actually figure out, you look for some kind of discrepancy? Tell me what it is so you've got all this data, so put that aside now, and we'll kind of assume sounds like you actually have a lot of good information, so I'll assume you have everything that you kind of need. What is it that you're looking for that's going to tell you that there's a gap? And how big does that gap have to be for anybody to really start to notice or feel like that's something they have to take action on?
Well, it really varies from country to country. And sometimes we're getting data from different sources. So I wouldn't say the best thing to do would be to compare to a benchmark external to the country that we're working on. But in Ecuador, we found that around half the population can't afford to purchase a diet that meets their nutrient needs. And that's something that's a bit surprising to a country like Ecuador that's still classified as a middle income country where a lot of things are going well. And nutrition hasn't quite improved to the point where they'd like to be. So then we can look at, okay, half the country can't purchase their nutrient needs. These are the policies you're putting in place, and how can those policies work together to deliver and improve the affordability of a nutritious diet?
And so is it pretty simple that you're basically taking that economic data and you're saying this is how much people earn, and then you're saying this is how much it costs, and it's kind of simple at that point to say they make more or not, and that's kind of it?
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So that's really interesting. So what is, let's see. So let's kind of take a little bit of a different approach here to kind of think about some things. So what have you learned so far from some of the work with Ecuador? Have you had some successes, or is this in the early stages of figuring out potential policy changes?
Well, the policy is already in place. The interesting thing with Ecuador is um, with the last administration, with President Correa, he really ramped up the amount of spending that was going within social protection. And now the country has had a bit of a debt crisis. So there's been a lot of cuts. So when we're meeting with government ministers, they're telling us, people are losing their jobs. They're not able to deliver on the interventions that they'd hoped to. So really where we can come in is to try to say to the government, okay, if you want to do everything, but you only have a set amount of money, then among the interventions that you're looking at least based on our analysis, we can help prioritize which interventions should come first. And the idea that what we're trying to do, and as you'll see in the workbook, is we're trying to get everybody to come together. The evidence around nutrition, the success stories that have taken place around the world, it's when everybody's working on it at once. It can't just be the health sector or just be the social protection sector. So we're trying to get and maintain and build on the buy-in that's already there from the Ministry of Agriculture, from the Ministry of Education, Social Protection, and Health, along with the Statistics Bureau that's generating all the data. I'm very familiar with the work that we're doing. So the idea is here, even with resources that may be getting cut, how can everybody work together to make sure nutrition is one of the goals that the country can deliver?
So what are the challenges on bringing those people together? Is that what your work is trying to do, is give people that foundation so they can all have a common framework to talk about?
Yeah, exactly. The first challenge, of course, is to get everybody in the room. And then once you have them in the room, to see where is everybody. And so far in Ecuador, all the sectors have agreed, they're committed, and they want to do their part to improve the nutrition situation. So then it's, how can we work together? Does it make sense for one household to be getting an intervention from all 4 different agencies? Because that will cost a lot of money. Is it better for one household, depending on their need, to only be getting one of the 4 interventions? And we find that everybody's doing something, but the agencies aren't always aware of what the other sectors are doing too. So trying to get everybody to work together and say, this is how we can tackle this problem without being siloed from one agency to the next.
Wow. So is all of the data that comes out of the combination of these other systems, is that what you're feeding into Tableau? What are we actually going to be looking at? Or are you bringing some of that together in Tableau and then doing some of the analysis?
So what we'll look at today in Tableau, I've completely made up all the numbers. They're all fake numbers. Just for the sake of the exercise today. We're still doing the analysis and we haven't finished it yet. But one of the most amazing things, at least for me as a new Tableau user, is that once you have the real numbers in Excel, you just put in the new numbers and everything updates automatically. So what we're looking at today are some fake numbers, and we have 2 major audiences here. So this is a good point to explain this. On the one hand, the people who we're having regular conversations with are technical level people who are sort of at my level, who I can see eye to eye with on these things, the ones who are responsible for picking the foods that will go into a school feeding program, or deciding what will the Ministry of Agriculture, how are they going to deliver on a project and make sure it's nutrition sensitive. That's the first tier. And then the second tier is we're trying to work with the technical people to go up a level to the real policymakers who can say, yes, we're going to do school feeding. Yes, we're going to do school feeding this way. So my hope is that the Tableau workbook is nimble enough to appeal to both audiences. One being technical people, if they have to choose between 2 packages, which one is better than the other, and then to go up a higher level to make sure that the policymakers know, no matter what, we're not going to cut school feeding because this can really be a beneficial program.
Okay, so it's got really 2 purposes.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about some ideas here. So imagine, you're this, well, you don't have to imagine all of it, but so let's just say you're trying to talk to this audience, these, as you're calling, do these technical people have a name? What are they called? I don't feel like calling them.
So we have a technical working group with 2 members from each of the 4 government ministries that we'll see in the workbook. Ministry of MIAS, it's called in Spanish. We can call it social protection. And then we can say health, agriculture, and education. So we can say 2 people from each of those 4 groups who will be in our very first meeting, and we'll have some comments on the workbook that we'll be looking at today.
But what is if you could only pick, say, one thing to show them, all right, you've got this, you have limited time now. You have lots of projects, and you say, guys, I can only kind of come up with one thing. What would be the most important thing that you would be able to tell these group of people to help them, as you said, kind of figure out what food they would need to select?
That's a great question. I think my answer would be just to keep everybody motivated, to say, this is where we are, and this is where we can get to with everybody working together.
Interesting. What does that really mean, though? When you say we want to keep them, keep them motivated.
Right.
A little bit more about that.
Sure. So the Ministry of Agriculture will be doing their programs anyway, and it's trying to say, okay, how can we make sure nutrition is a part of what they're doing? The Ministry of Education, their top priority, realistically, it isn't the nutrition of their students, it's to educate their students and to say, okay, how can nutrition be a part of what you're doing? And then to say, among the group we have here, how can we make sure everybody works together and can climb the ladder of their respective agencies to make sure that nutrition's on their radar?
Interesting. Okay. They've agreed to work together, but it's not necessarily that that's their foremost concern, so that you really need to keep this in their eye that, hey guys, you still have to participate, even though this may not be your number one. Like you said, Ministry of Education is worried about education, but obviously nutrition plays a role, right? Kids with poor nutrition are going to have a lot tougher time in school. So things are interconnected.
And sometimes our technical working group is on board, and what we're trying to do is empower them to say, this is how you bring the message when you do go up the ladder to the head of your agency.
Mm-hmm. So on the other side of that, so what happened? How do you handle, or have you already had a situation where somebody's resisted a little bit? How have you dealt with that? What has that been like? Have you done it just with conversation? Have you done it with more data? What has that been like?
Well, the data that we'll look at today, it's something that, as far as I'm aware of, WFP and my team, Fill the Nutrient Gap, we're the only ones looking at nutrition with this particular data set and with this particular approach. So the numbers really do jump out at people because they know the stunting prevalence in their country. They know about dietary diversity. They know which target groups are the most vulnerable. And then this is really a chance where we can bring something new that people haven't seen. I guess to answer your question, where do we get resistance from? The countries, there isn't an infinite budget. People can only do so much, and change takes time. So all we can try to do is try to come in, present the information we have, make the best pitch we can, try to say, if you really are serious about working and improving the nutrition situation, these are some concrete steps you can take to do it. And then the hope is that over time, the nutrition situation in each country will start to improve.
Right, because you're saying there are policies already in place. You're not really helping set policy, you're just really helping guide through your analysis.
Right, just given the nature of Ecuador. In other countries, the policy hasn't been written yet. And then we can try to frame, okay, like for example, in Mozambique, we just did some secondary data analysis. We had some government data sets that we were playing around with, and we figured out that the average rural household is producing 90% of their own food, and they're only growing 4 crops. So anything you want to do for nutrition, realistically, the households are probably going to have to grow it. So to try to steer, when you put in your new policy, to say, oh, we're going to fortify all these foods that people can buy in supermarkets. Well, if people are growing 90% of their own food, that's not going to be a realistic step to achieve what you're trying to do. So it really does vary in each country. This conversation, I'm trying to, at least for me, it's easier to keep it tied to Ecuador. And I'll say that in this case, there's a really strong policy in place, and it's just a matter of keeping up the momentum sustained, because writing the policy is the first step. Actually delivering on it is the second step. So saying, make sure this is always a priority when it comes to the budgets. Make sure you're delivering on these interventions that, at least to us, based on our analysis, looks like they'll definitely be beneficial, and make sure everyone's working together, getting out of their silos and keeping each other in the loop as everyone moves forward together.
Got it. Got it. Well, this is great. I think this is a good start for us to jump in and take a look at the work you've done and start to see how we can begin to, or how well it reflects what we've just talked about, and see what we can do. The part that really just kind of caught my attention was really the last part you just said that we talked about, was the resistance side. And it's all about getting them to, you're really convincing them to try to do something. This is really, there's a lot of persuasion here, and you said motivation, and ultimately get them to do something. So I think that really ties in with the notion of what we're trying to do here anyway, with the whole point is to take action.
Exactly, 100%.
All right. So everybody should be seeing the workbook now. And this is your story. And yeah.
The workbook is not, there you go.
We're all good?
All good, thank you.
Great, thanks. So one thing that, and maybe again, this is a work in progress, so I know you're probably still figuring it out. Is there something that I know this is data that you're still working with, but in your mind, have you already, with the other data, have you come up with some idea of what you think you need to tell them? Or we could even pretend that it's with this data, in fact. So why don't we just even stick with that? So let's ignore that question for a second. So let's take this idea that you said about motivation. So if you were starting your story, is this right here? Is this the one thing that if you showed them, they would be like, wow, we have definitely got to be strong and make sure that we take care of this problem?
No, certainly not.
Okay, why did you say that?
So I'm experiencing a challenge that I feel like a lot of Tableau users can relate to as someone who's new to Tableau. So what I've done with the workbook we're looking at today is take a presentation we've already given in PowerPoint and try to pick up halfway through that presentation and shift it over to Tableau. So I've started sort of at the point where I wanted to switch from a slide deck that we present to now we're jumping over to Tableau. And sure, what we're looking at here might be interesting, but it's not necessarily something that if you come across this dashboard online will really suck you in.
So has the kind of the main point already been made in the PowerPoint? And so someone's already seen that, and then this is just like a supplement to that?
Yes, yeah, we can say that.
Okay, so what would be the jumping off point here? Why would you've told them some things, they're interested in what you have to say. What is it that you're trying to transition to now?
So now we're trying to get a sense of how much does this nutritious diet cost? How many people can and cannot afford it? And what can we do to try to make sure the government policy delivers on improving the percentage of households that can afford to meet their nutrient needs?
Okay, great. So that's good. So do you think so when you're kind of going through this, is this what I'm just curious because I'm thinking about this again as a story about what's going to get people to do something. What do you think is on people's minds? So you've convinced them at this point. Do you think that they're interested in going through kind of all these little pieces of data, or that you, like, again, kind of think about the one thing at this point? If they were saying, oh, I got a meeting, I got to run out the door now. I thought I had more time. What are the one or two things that you've got here in terms of concepts that you'd want to show them? Would it be this, or would you be jumping to one of the other points in this? You've got about, I don't know, 10 or so pages here.
Right. I think the first point has to be that half the people in Ecuador would not be able to afford a diet that meets their nutrient needs.
Okay, so where would
And I
that
think
be?
that will catch people by surprise.
So that
It
where
looks
does that
like
show up here?
the sixth one that says non-affordability is, no, I guess the fourth one. Let's see what we have in the fourth one. Yeah, right there.
Okay,
Something with this data.
great. So just for the sake of this, I'm just going to pull that right up to the front here, just to think that that's our real starting point. And I would, and we'll kind of go through a bunch of different discussions here now. So I would even put that, that might even be your story, right? That might even be your top line. So let me just, now I know some of you might not be seeing these pop-ups here. So in the video that we create, we'll make sure to have them in there. So I'm just going to copy this. And let's just put that up here, just for the sake of the discussion. And we can format some of these things later. And then you might even put something else in here too. So now let's talk about this visual. Let's get into like, how do we make that really, really jump out as best as possible? So let's go in there and let's see where we are, right down here. All right. So is this all of Ecuador? What are these three?
Right. It's divided up into three different regions. The Amazon, the coast, and Sierra is the mountains.
Okay. And this 48% is just the average of these three.
Yeah, it's a weighted average based on population.
Okay, got it. And tell me a little bit about what's going on here in terms of you've kind of got this one is a dark, oh, I see something, dark blue, and then you've got these light blues here. What is the kind of the significance behind that?
Well, I found it interesting that it really doesn't vary that much between the three regions, because people know that the Amazon is more of an indigenous community where you have higher levels of poverty. So the sense could be that the percentage unable to afford the diet would be higher in the Amazon. But what we found is that in the coast, even though people have more money, foods are more expensive. So things tend to even out throughout the country.
Okay. Interesting. And is there anything particular about the colors that you chose?
Well, our standard is just to use blue, because we give a lot of presentations and we find blue, even on a bad projector, still can usually shine through. So it's just saying, okay, we always do blue. I'll make one dark blue and the other's light blue. That's all.
Got it. Okay. So let's go over to the sheet here and talk about a few things. So, and I get the blue, and one thing I did looking through the whole workbook was see there's a lot of blue, and there's some good with that, and then there's some downsides that I want to touch on with you, just for your thinking, because I know that somebody can kind of latch on to one color concept, and that starts to play a big role in what you do. So let's just take this page, and I want to clean it up a little bit, just to make some things jump out, and maybe there's some reasons you've done some things, so I want to talk about that before I just say that they should be changed. So for example here, you have your axis set to 100%. Is that a standard inside the work you do, instead of saying, well, we'll just let it go to the highest so that these take up a full amount of space in the view? Is there something particular about that?
Yeah, among our team, we do like to set the axis at 100% because there's so much you can do with how something appears visually based on adjusting the axis. So we just try to keep that standard across the countries to prevent ourselves from really trying to make something snap with a simple axis manipulation.
Okay. Oops. So great. So one thing that we can do around that, and I'm just going to make a copy of this page. One thing I would suggest, and you can, again, these are just concepts for you to think about, but this is how I might go about it. The first thing I would do, and maybe this actually might deal with the thing that you were just talking about, is I would just make this automatic. Okay. And then I would actually just get rid of the axis. So that way there's no things that look like they're hiding or not, or playing around with the axis. It just kind of gives it that maximum visibility. Even if you didn't even if you didn't make it automatic and you left it at fixed, I would even still consider getting rid of the axis, although that might look weird, and because these bars would be down here. I might also get rid of, this is just some cleanup stuff, and then we'll get to some more specific things that I want to talk about. I also like to just, for clarity's sake, probably just get rid of some of the formatting here. So if we look at the bars that are surrounding this, which are really dividers, I think we can just get rid of those. Clean that up a little bit. But here's the big thing. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but why is this dark blue and these are light blue?
Just the idea that there's separate categories. One is the national average and the other are different regions. They have to be different colors, so make one dark and the other light. Okay.
And is this the one that you would say is most important, this national average?
Yeah.
Okay. So another thing you could do, so I see you have it, but what I would do here, instead of making these blue, and here's where some of the concept comes in about how do people absorb information. This dark blue is the one you really want to stand out.
Right.
And so that's one part. The other thing is, if you have a light blue and a dark blue, there's people in some ways make a mental association between them. That one should be that the color, when it looks like this, is that there's one is high and one is lower. So when you see a light blue and a dark blue, people think, oh, these have lower value as light blue and the dark blue should have a higher value. Where your intention is to actually have them mean separate groups, right? One is the national average and then one is these three regions.
Right.
So the better way to do that is actually to go in and edit the colors and change them to something else. So that way I might make these three, and I know you guys can't see this, but I'm pretty sure folks know how to change the color, but I'm going to make it like maybe a dark, maybe we'll make it, let's see, like a gray. Okay. And then we'll make all three of these a gray. Let's see what that looks like. And you can go and change this later if you don't like it, but as an idea, you can make it a light gray, a dark gray, but it makes it more distinct. When you're dealing with groups such as this, the rules in terms of how you use the color is groups should have distinct colors, whereas something like where they have a gradient of colors, even though you only had a light and a dark, that's more like a gradient with two values. Yeah. That's really more used to show an actual value, okay? So this is one way, and then maybe this would stand out a little bit more too, because people make that will not have that mental association that maybe they're making. Okay.
Yeah.
So that might be one. let's look at, so then we have this. Is there anything else that you think you would want to be talking about at this point? So you might make this one point, right, on the beginning. Then what comes next?
What we
What
could
do you
do here also on the same page is have something showing that nutrition is a problem. So show the stunting prevalence over time hasn't decreased as much as they would like, or say this is a goal for the stunting prevalence. This is where you are now. This is where you're trying to go. So something that shows that this non-affordability estimate is connected to an ongoing problem, something that people have already bought into as something they're working on.
Okay. And so where is that coming in? Is that in here already somewhere?
No, it's not. It's just an idea that popped in my head looking at
Uh,
this, at how much space we have on the page. What's your advice with the space? Is it better to cram a few more things in there, or to just really keep it simple from the beginning and slowly build? But just the way you phrased it, as if you've only got one screen to try to suck somebody in, what's the best way to do that?
yeah, that's really a great question. Here's the answer. Of course, it depends on a couple things. The first thing I can respond to is never cram. Okay. If you think about this as a communications point, which I think really fits well with the model of what you're trying to do, right? You don't want to put things on here that would take away from the message, right? So by just putting stuff on here for the sake of, well, I have space, could actually take away, because you may add something on here that doesn't really connect as directly with the point you're trying to make. And that's why I asked it that way. So while if this was the one thing that you knew was going to be a showstopper, for example, and people were going to have a conversation about it, I would say you don't need to put anything else on here. But if there's something that you say, well, we're going to show this, but it on its own, it's powerful, but we need to show this other piece to really make it be, a knockout punch for them. Like really just have them go, wow, we really need to pay attention, right? Because maybe they go, okay, 48%, yeah, whatever. I mean, not that they would. I know it's a real issue, but like the second thing that you just said, if that was the next piece to really drive this home, I would look for a way to show it on here, unless it was going to take away visually, right? If you say, well, I need to make something that's so big that this would get too small and I would lose its impact. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and thinking about it now, I think, sure, this is a powerful message, but if it can be connected to something else, then the conversation can be on the relationship between um, the two pieces of information that we're putting up, and not just this, which has to stand on its own legs.
Okay. Yeah, so I think this is really interesting that as we go through this, it's coming to mind for you, that it's not in here yet. I'm just curious, why do you think that is? I mean, because obviously you know this really well. Why do you imagine that didn't come to mind before?
Well, towards the end, where I have the dashboards, that's really why I turned to Tableau. Because what we've been doing is we present all the evidence testing different interventions to reduce the cost of meeting the nutrient needs for different populations. And the first way we tried to solve that problem was by PowerPoint presentations, where we just showed graphs over and over that was very repetitive. And we noticed we were losing people to say, this is a 2-year-old child. These are the different government actors that can reduce the cost for the child in different places, and one after the other. So the second phase was we would print out all that information in big pieces of paper, give everybody a stack of pages, and then give a little quiz to say, if you live in the Sierra and you want to do school feeding, which is better, package 1 or package 2? And then just the activity of doing the quiz would get people to do it. But seeing that activity happen, which went very well, it gets the message across that not that people are going to walk out tomorrow and say, we have to do package 2, but people would walk out tomorrow and say, if I have 9 packages to choose from and I have to pick one, this is where I can access the data to better inform my decision. But the problem with printing out all the papers is by the end of the activity, it's a mess. And you have stacks of papers that are all jumbled up in an order, and the information, it's an extra step for people to go dig through the report. So I said, knowing a little bit that I do about Tableau, and this is the first piece I've ever worked on with Tableau, if we could create some sort of dashboard that lived online where people can click around and get the same information that we have in 100 printouts in one dashboard, I think people would be more likely to use it, and the information is more permanent. They're pulling it out on their computer to look at it. It's not going to fall apart the second the pages get jumbled out of order. So I started with that, but then tried to say, okay, what else can I do with Tableau to try to build up into that and build a narrative? Because the dashboard, having all these different things you can choose, there was no narrative to it. It was just a lot of information put in one place where it was up to the user to kind of pick and choose what it is they wanted to look at.
Wow. Yeah. I'm going to make a quick comment about that, and then I want to work a little bit more in Tableau, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So just to keep in mind, because you told me something early on that there's really two, kind of, you said actors and audiences. There's the people that you work with kind of hand in hand, and then there's more of the executives. If your kind of vision is to have this live online, you really need to consider the possibility that you need to do two of these. What I mean is, one might be targeted at that technical person you described, and one might be for the more senior management person. A lot of times people will say, here's my one set of Tableau dashboards, and it's okay, this has to work for everybody. But if you have two different audiences, that might not be appropriate. So I don't want to we won't have time to get into the details here, but I just want to raise that point that it may not be a one fits for everybody. So let's just, aside from the fact that you had this idea that maybe there's something in here that you could build, which one of these other ones might you choose to go along with this, or which one would come next in the story from what you've got so far? So we've kind of got this as the number one. What would come next? So you showed them this, they go, wow, that's eye-opening. What would be the next thing you'd want to hit them with?
I think it would be to say, yeah, what can we do about it, and start to look at the different interventions.
Okay. And so
the other things that we're doing in PowerPoint would be to, after this, see how it varies geographically, which is something that we've already kind of done with the 3 regions, or see that how it varies, how the cost varies by household member. The adolescent girl tends to be most expensive, which is something that catches people by surprise. So we could have something like that, or we could say, keep it really short and say, this is the problem. This is how the government policy can try to work on it.
I think I want to look. There's one here I want to bring up, because let's play. Let's assume I want to find it, because it really hit me as something we should. Oh yeah, I think it was one of these. This would be good to speak about. Let me just click. I'm going to assume it. Let's just say it's going to be one of these pages, because I want to point out. I told you I wanted to talk about the colors, and maybe this is a page that would actually come next anyway.
So this is the dashboard. This is what I had in mind when I picked up Tableau and said I want to put this information in Tableau.
Perfect.
It's what I'm trying to do with the intro is to get people interested and get to this.
Great.
At least for the technical audience.
So this is good. So I like this. I think this is interesting, kind of how you have it. I like these little symbols to help draw people's attention to what it is. Now, we talked about the blue before, and we talked about the gradients and the range. And when I saw this, it drew my attention, because I want to point, this is more of a technical issue in Tableau that you have to be really careful about. And maybe there's a solution here that we can work through quickly, but we got to look at it. So you see here, let's say, for example, 40 cents. This is the darkest blue in here, which I'm not sure. These are the lowest numbers or the highest numbers? How does this work?
So what you see is the top row is the cost for the child, and then every row after is with an intervention. So that's in Guayaquil. If you deliver canasta 1, the cost goes down to 40 cents for the child.
Okay.
So if someone's choosing should we do canasta 1, canasta 2, canasta 3? It's trying to steer them towards the most effective.
Okay. So now here I see 40 cents is a dark blue. Now I go here and dark blue is 5.80.
Right.
Okay, so there's, and then here it's $23. So this is a challenge, and I say this is a technical challenge because I'm guessing these are probably 3 separate worksheets in Tableau for the child, the mother, and the household. So what happens is when you work on I'm guessing that's the case, when you work on separate worksheets, in fact, let's go to that one and we could see. When you work on separate worksheets, then Tableau is going to treat each of these independently. So it picks the color range for here, it picks the color range here, and the range for here. So you have to be a little bit careful when you do that. So there's a couple ways around it. It depends. If you want to use blue here, you have to synchronize them and set some ranges so that the range is always the same. Or because these are completely different topics, so you have child, mother, and household as 3 topics, then what you could do is have them be different colors. Okay? So but you'd have to pick that carefully and you'd have to use it everywhere. So let's say children are blue, lactating mothers are, I don't know, purple, and households are orange, for example, something like that. You would have to use those choices everywhere in the whole workbook. So you'd set those as kind of a standard. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it's a big thing to think about. Now I'm just curious. I just want to pop over. Got a lot of little highlights here. Not sure. Let's go to this sheet. Not sure where we're going to go here. Nothing came up for that one.
So this is the Ministry of Agriculture for the 2-year-old.
Okay. Let me go back here for a second. We're going to have to stop in a minute. I just want to go through and see if I can, what I'm going to guess, and maybe you and I can look at this offline, is that maybe there's some things to do in the workbooks themselves that could be handled better. Yeah, these aren't, I think these are filtered, so they're not gonna, yeah. So we'll come back and look at that. Let me just pull up one more thing. And let's see if we go, I want to look for some issues to talk about. And then we'll do Q&A quickly, and then we'll wrap up. So one thing so you have the same kind of thing here with the maps, with the colors. I noticed with the gradients, because as you pop between the maps, the ranges will change. And so what looks like dark blue on one changes to light blue or a lighter color when you go to another, like see how this is dark blue here. Then you pop over to here and it becomes lighter. So you have to kind of link those. Again, it's the same kind of issue. You have to think about making sure, because it gets confusing, because I like, wait a second, on the last one you showed me, I thought it was a darker color, and then you get focused on that aspect of it, and then people are distracted and they're not actually paying attention to what you're trying to tell them. You're talking and they're thinking these other things. The one thing I would love to figure out, and again, this is something we could talk about if we had some more time. I know this kind of looks slick, all right? I'm guessing that these must be the 4 groups you talked about that you want to work together. Is that correct?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so if I click between them, I have different child ranges. What I'd love to, this is the same, kind of the same, although lactating mother. So yes, what I would love to do, from an analytics standpoint, what happens here is I have to click through each of these 4, and I imagine you're talking about this one, and you can say what's happening with the children. You might be on this one talking about what's happening with the children. In some way, the ideal is that we can combine this in a way that I don't have to click on these 4, and that it's presented as a whole. That's the ultimate goal here, because from an analytics standpoint, if I have to move back and forth it's hard to remember what points I made or to remember the different values that are showing up, right? So here, and I click on that, I can't really remember what this looked like, right? It's very difficult to know the different values. So if we can find a way to have all the information show up on one page, that's going to help from an analytics standpoint tremendously, because people won't be going back and forth. But that gets to thinking about it more as again, how do I communicate the message versus how do I use interactive features in Tableau, which is where a lot of people start. A lot of people kind of go through something like this because it looks nice, which I can't deny. It actually does look pretty slick. But the goal is to really simplify it so people can use it more than, making it look cool. But we can talk about that offline. But that's just, again, a point that people should be focused on in this kind of presentation. So let me stop here and see, Pam, are there some Q&A that we can address?
I don't see any questions. I don't know if it's something wrong with mine. Do you see any questions, Lee? Because I didn't see any come in.
Let me pop over to the chat window here.
Yeah, I'm in the chat.
Nope, I don't see any. Okay. But so let's kind of maybe wrap up. Maybe Neil has a few thoughts or questions, maybe some things that else, other things
also, I had something to think about that maybe the two of you can discuss just to wrap back from what you were talking about what's the biggest thing here is that you want to present some way to motivate these two audiences, right? So I think you were getting towards that, Lee, when you were saying about having sort of the correlation in the dashboard. Maybe you can both speak about that a bit more.
Yeah, I'll let Neil see if he has any comments on that.
What do you mean by the correlation?
Well, because what Lee was mentioning is instead of having to click back to find numbers, that perhaps there's a way to present the data a little differently so that you can actually see a correlation across the groups. Because right now, if you were, say, you were looking at one group, say lactating mothers, and then you went to click into another group, you couldn't compare easily in your head. You'd almost have to write down the number. So I don't know,
It's a good point. And my concern with doing it that way was how to motivate people and not give the sense that, okay, Ministry of Agriculture, what you're going to do, it's not as good as what Ministry of Health can do. But maybe that's the whole point, is that Ministry of Health should be doing with that target group and Ministry of Agriculture shouldn't. So it comes from my fear of not trying to make one look better than the other. But I think one way to address the issue Lee has made would be, instead of having the 4 at the top by
I was just mentioning that maybe you could wrap up that last thought, since we are at the time and I think we are losing people.
Yeah, I think what you raise a great point, Neil, about we don't want someone to think that they're worse, or however you want to think about that. That's the point of all of this, is facing the truth, right? When things become more visible and you have access to the data and ways to show it, maybe in ways that raise those points, there's no avoiding it. And I think, especially in your world, where people are trying not that other people aren't, but especially what your goals is to really make a huge impact, right? And the only way to do that is to really do the best for the people you're trying to help. So putting that information up there, well, it might seem negative. They're still going to see it when they click the other one, right? All you're doing is making it more upfront. But it also might instigate the kind of conversation that you need to have more directly, because ultimately that's your goal, right? It's to motivate them to speak and say, well, maybe there's learning. Instead of it's worse, it's like, how did you do that? How did you make such amazing progress? What could we do like that? Which I think is probably something you're hoping will happen, right? It's not that each person necessarily does their own thing, but somehow either in concert or they're learning from each other, whatever that ultimate decision is on how they want to work together. So I would strive. I actually would really want you to make it that way, especially now that you've said that. That would, to me, be huge.
Yeah, and not to see it as, oh, you guys shouldn't do anything, but it's you should be doing better. Look at what the others are doing, and what can you do? You say you want to be a part of this, so improve your intervention.
Yeah, and in the beginning, when people see that, sometimes it does become either a bit of a shock, or they're offended, or whatever, or they feel like the finger is pointed at them in different situations, and that's something you have to deal with. There's a lot of cultural issues that come out of when you reveal the data. Things happen that people don't anticipate. Personally, right? People put their heart and soul into wanting to help people, and they feel they've done their best, and maybe they look at it and say, wow, maybe I didn't do so well, or maybe I could have done a lot better, right? So it might hit them the wrong way at first, and then you have to, right? You kind of have to turn them around into what you just said. Hey, this is the opportunity we're looking for. This is the kind of thing that could make a breakthrough for people if we can understand this better. So yeah, I think, Pam, thanks for bringing that up, and Neil, those are kind of two great things to close with, because ultimately, as we said in the beginning, the whole idea is to get people to do something, right? Not to present, but to get them to act. And these are the kinds of things I think that we can get them to start turning around a little bit. Not that they aren't, but it's going to make a bigger difference. So I know we're a few minutes over. I want to thank folks for tuning in, and look for the video to come back online so you can pick up the conversation again, and maybe get some more questions. Will be available to comment on the blog once this is up. Neil, I want to thank you so much again for putting yourself out there, sharing your work, and Pam, as always, thanks for moderating us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much for your expertise and wisdom with this.
All right,
Yeah,
everybody.
great.
We'll see
Take
you
care.
in a few weeks again. Look out for the next announcement.